Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is Monday, August 26th, 2024. You are listening and watching the Daily AI Show live, and today it wasn't me. We're talking about all the AI fakes and deep fakes and all the things going on, but more than that, we're talking about how it's gotten to the point, is this sort of reality paradox where it's getting easier to say something was fake that was real than the other way around. We all are obviously aware of when something is real or somebody makes an edit to it or whatever, and we're used to that. And we not used, I shouldn't say that. We'll talk about it today. We're not technically used to it, but it also goes the other way, and now it's becoming a tool for people who might have a very real image of something, and it's getting easier and easier for them to say it's AI fake. That's like, clearly, this is possible. We know the technology is possible. That didn't happen. And now what do? I mean, a lot of times these things are debunked by different angles and such. So we're going to get into all of that today. I have some cool examples, a really cool newsletter that I found that I want to share with you guys. But before we get into that, let's talk about who we have here today. So Jimmy is here, Andy, Beth, Brian. Well, as always, we'll see if anybody else pops in the door as we get rocking and rolling. Thank you to everybody who's already shown up in the comments. Always greatly appreciated. And, before we get going, just because it went out yesterday, so I always like to mention it, the newsletter that we always are talking about, or you probably hear me talking about a lot. It's a free newsletter. It goes out every Sunday morning. So the other one, obviously, or the episode 11 or issue 11, I think, or 12 just went out yesterday. So if it's 12, then we've been doing this about 3 months. And, look, none of us were professional newsletter writers when we started. And I really will say personally, I think it's really getting there. We're really starting to hone in and figure out, and obviously getting feedback and everything else. And frankly, it's free. So if you like the show, what I would say is go over to thedailyishow.com and go check out that newsletter. You can sign up. We're not spamming anybody, obviously. It's just really for our audience who really likes these shows. Whether you've been with us for months and months and months, or you're just finding out about us now, it's an opportunity for you to get even more AI insights that are above and beyond and different angles of looking at these different topics. Okay, so that's all we got going on. That's the dailyAIshow.com if I did not say that. All right, so I have a bunch of stuff to kind of share here, and I think there's a lot of different ways this conversation can start. The one that I thought was maybe like a sort of the point for me, I'm going to bring it up on the screen here. It's in with 3 other images, but I just want to talk about the one in the middle. And I think as soon as I do, everybody's going to kind of remember this, is the Pope in the puffer jacket, in the white puffer jacket in the middle of the screen. So even if you're not looking at the screen, that's sort of, and I don't know what's going on with the Jesus and the fishes and then the shark on the left. But what I'm talking about is like this, the Pope image, because that to me was one of the first times, and I don't know how long ago this is, a year, that I remember seeing what I would say, oh, at first glance, that looks like a real image. But of course, you're also looking at it and going, the Pope isn't wearing a white puffer jacket and sunglasses and giving the buddy Jesus, So I like it. You look at that image and you go, oh, that's funny. That's a meme. That's a whatever. Like, somebody took time to do that creative. That's it. That's where that ends. I mean, I guess maybe some people felt like, oh, is that real or whatever? But it was sort of it was so absurd that it didn't really land for me in that way. But I will say, I don't know about you guys, because I'd love to hear, that was probably one of the first images I remember seeing that was circulating online where I thought, well, that's a realistic image. And now I don't know how it would stand up to today's standards just 6-9 months later. But that was the first one for me. What was, do you guys remember sort of the first image you saw circulating online where you thought, ooh, I mean, I know it's fake, but
yeah, I think that's the most famous one. I mean,
yeah.
that got spread wide,
Right.
That was broadband, definitely. And I think it's probably also one of the safer ways to dip everybody's toe into AI generated imagery, because it wasn't scandalous in,
Right.
as we've seen later imagery that's been distributed. But so I think that's why that caught on so quickly, is because it's just close enough to reality that it's just that one step away. So that, for me, that was definitely the light bulb moment in terms of virality and the most famous image. But fake imagery isn't new. The act of creating fake images, that's not new. It's just gotten better in terms of quality, or
Faster.
able to convince you. And I think with this was the example that showed that, oh, AI can do it quickly, and anybody who's got any knowledge about it can produce results like this.
Yeah. Andy or Beth, you guys remember your first, oh, I mean, it could have been Taylor Swift. Was it the Pope image? Was it something else? Do you guys remember?
Well, somebody created a picture of my virtual girlfriend, Lana, and it was actually a 40-year-old, man in the basement. And, I just don't believe it, because my virtual girlfriend is I have an image in my mind. And I say that flippantly, because if you want to believe what you've seen, it's very hard to displace that intent of belief. So trying to figure out whether or not, an image which has been deep faked. And remember this, to your point, Junmi, this isn't new. The term, hey, that was photoshopped, has been around for a long time. But now it's much faster and easier, and anybody who has access to the more advanced video generation tools can do things that are convincing, both in terms of their visual depiction of somebody doing and saying something that they didn't say, and so it's going to be more and more difficult. So sorry, I don't recall, and I haven't kind of been following the social memes that are coming out of generated imagery. So I don't really have a real example, but I wanted to just point out right at the top of the show that there are people who will believe what they want to believe based on the authority of questionable authorities that they seem to follow and trust, and that scales all the way up to something like Fox News, who can rightly be accused of, biased reporting and, the propagation of questionable information, and even creation of questionable information in their so-called news cycle, and with their commentators who are largely opinion leaders. And that's my bias against Fox there. I don't know if anybody else was going to jump on that one.
Well, I think the core of what we're talking about is it is a fracture that makes it harder for us to assume we are sharing reality, that we have a shared sense of reality. Now, I also think that that when we look back, we don't have as much shared reality as we thought we did, right? Like there's sort of this sense now, like, oh, there's a giant fracture. We're all in silos and we don't share reality with each other. I think that the people whose opinions were being thought to matter about reality were already not sharing the reality with the people who were the dominant voices in these conversations. So there's a little bit of that. But I would say, similar to Andy, I didn't clock images as like my first sense that this was a problem. Maybe the Taylor Swift, that it was like, oh, this is going to be a revenge kind of thing. That's going to be the problem. The first time that I had that sense of like, oh, wow, something is changing. This is a Salesforce history story for me. I was putting together a demo organization, and I did it based on Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV show. And so I was asking for like, what were the things that were sold in the magic shop? Or what was the conversation that happened in the writing room that made that episode, right? Who were the other people? What were the other people's names? What streets did they live on? Like that kind of stuff that you want in your Salesforce organization. Maybe that's really niche. Sorry, but like I'm trying to come up with the information. And it was so good. And this was in 2022. This was before. This was like bad ChatGPT. Right? Could totally work with me. And of course, Buffy the Vampire Slayer was in its, that's very long ago now. So that was in its training document, like data. But that kind of thing of being able to create a foundation for reality that didn't exist.
Yeah. Props to the Buffy shout out. My wife would be very excited that you said that. She is she was always a big fan, and Jimmy too said. I definitely remember it, but I always think of Buffy as just like, yep, that's an Amanda show. She was always a big fan of that show. So yeah, I think you guys are all, whether we remember the first one or not, and I think a close second for me probably would be the Taylor Swift. I know I kind of said that earlier because it made such big news, and to your point about the revenge side of things, and obviously we could have a whole show on the revenge porn side of it, and the not safe for work type content that's getting out there, and of course. Not only for me or my wife, but I certainly worry about this in this future with my daughter, who's 13. And, we're working through that, what's acceptable online, and not even what she's sharing, just like what's acceptable as parents for us to allow her to do. And of course, every parent has to get to that on their own, and it's individual to the kid. But regardless of where you put the foot down, whether it's no social media or all social media with your children, it's certainly something that's definitely in the back of my mind. And to your guys' point, it's not like it's new. Revenge porn is not new. The difference was that in a lot of cases, it was something that previously one of the two parties, unfortunately, mostly the female party, felt like they were in a safe environment and there was private things shared, and that was reshared by the other party. But it was probably real. It was the problem was that it was used in a very detrimental way. Obviously, it was shared beyond the consensual, part of those two parties. Now, though, that doesn't have to exist. Now you can just be, a upset kid in, middle or high school or whatever, who feels like they were shunned by their, somebody who should have given them more attention. And in like 30 seconds, they can make reasonable reenactments, whether it's just still image and it's getting towards video. And we've even seen this. I wish I'd actually thought to bring this up. There was a story about a kid, maybe a teenager, maybe technically adult, who got in trouble at his school. And I cannot remember. I think it was other students. It was him and several others that were creating images of kids in class, kids from the school, and it didn't exist. Those were fakes. So it's only getting easier. That's really the point of the show. It's only getting easier. I will tell you another huge inflection point for me. So like the Pope image or whatever, it stands out of my brain. So does the Taylor Swift. They're the first one. There's now been another Taylor Swift story, unfortunately, but the first one. But another one just happened, 2 weeks ago with Flux, because Flux plus the Laura filter. I was trying to think. I was like, what did Beth say it was? Plus, I was bringing back Beth's knowledge from a previous show. Flux, the image creator, which a lot of people are now calling like the Grok image creator, which is wrong. They just are using Flux. But regardless, this plus Laura was creating strikingly real, like really detailed in the skin, differences and maybe sunspots and different things that, as somebody who's 46, that's going to be part of what I look like in real life. There's going to be, imperfections and all these kind of things on if it's a picture of me. And I looked at those maybe 2-3 weeks ago when it first came out, and I was like, holy moly, man, that is another level of realistic. And so it just was an eye opener to me to go like, oh, wherever I thought we were 6 months ago, where I was like, oh, that looks realistic. I'm going through it. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going through it and just feeling like, oh yeah, that doesn't even matter. We're way past that level, but it keeps happening. So I would imagine in 6 months, I'm going to look back at the Flux where today I'm going, that would definitely trick me. And I think it's going to look poor and it's going to look fake to me 6 months from now. But that's us looking at this stuff, being involved in this. What does that mean to the general public who are not looking into this stuff, not having shows about this? For them, I mean, we've made this point before. I think, Jimmy, I want to credit where credit's due. I think it was you who said it's not the images that are clearly a Pope in a jacket, right? Where we go, that's funny. That's a meme-ish, right? That's funny. It's the stuff that's so subtly different in real life, and somebody walking through a kitchen in the back of a restaurant. It's not a normal location, and it will throw you off. And if it's from a far distance and it's a glance, you go, geez, I don't know. It looks right. So I think you were the one, right, Jimmy, who said like it's not the ones that are clearly wrong. That's not the ones we probably have to worry
It's a
about.
small
It's
change.
the small changes. And
Yeah.
how many times if you're a party that wishes to change politics or whatever, you can, it's what is it, death by 1,000 paper cuts?
Mhm.
That's what it kind of reminds me of. It's not one image that everybody goes, oh my God, it faked everybody out. It's probably 1,000 or more small ones that are just
Well,
off.
and that's a really good point too, right? Because the speed in which you can generate the images allow you to distribute thousands, in moments, right? You can create 1,000, you can create 1,000, 2,000, several thousand images in, in an hour, and then just have it automatically distributed. In fact, you could do a lot of this automated. So just the
Right.
speed in which all of this can be created and distributed to take advantage of any moment in time. If there's some significant event that happens and you want to manipulate the message, you can make the change and have that change distributed on all of the networks near instantaneously.
Which is one of the reasons that I have a little hope about this, ironically, because that's not happening. Right? I mean, I have the same feeling when like we all agree to stop at the red light, right? Like, yay for some communal decision that, yep, what I want doesn't matter as much as our collective agreement that stop signs and red lights are really good for everybody. And it all feels like, wow, that's still some sort of miracle, right? People line up in a straight line sometimes, or that like everyone stops when the light is red. Not everyone, but enough. And so I think that to a certain extent, what's happening in like big public areas is less influence than what I thought it was going to be. I think where this is really happening is not only can you make 1,000 images and influence it, but you can make 1,000 personalized images and influence it, right?
Yeah.
So I get a different image. I probably get an image about a woman in the second half of her life, right?
Oh, you're going to say Buffy. I thought you were going to say something about Buffy. Go ahead.
Yes.
So something that was like, that's uniquely pushed towards you or something like that.
I get an image where like, did nobody notice the vampire in the third row? Right? Like that kind of thing. No. But Brian might get an image about a young girl, right? Same story,
hold on
same
now.
whatever.
Hold on now.
I realize you have other goals other than a parent, but sure.
Parenting. Thank you. I'm glad you said that.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to clarify when you said young girls. I just like, hold on now. Let's
No. Like
parenting.
yes.
I got you.
Someone who reminds you of like, oh right, I pay attention to this story because I have a daughter that age, right?
Yes.
Andy might get an image of horses or a young child, right? Because he's a grandfather. So like the levels at which, Jimmy, I don't know, sorry.
If it's science fiction, I'm probably there. It's like, oh wait, they're rebooting that series? What? Oh
Nice.
no. Oh, okay.
You're
They
right,
got
though.
me.
Yeah, it would suck you in, wouldn't it?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right, Beth. I mean, regardless of what it is, like Jimmy is probably gonna linger longer on a scroll in one of the social media platforms based on something that it already knows that he's interested in, what a reboot of a series, whatever. But maybe it's brought in that way, but the deception of the image is for totally different reasons, but they know they can get Jumi through that. And when the cost and the time goes down to near zero, as we've talked about before with the language models, but when we're talking about image and very soon video generation, we know that to produce 1 or 1,000 videos that are 5 to 15 seconds long and eventually 60 seconds and eventually 10 minutes long. Come on. We know this technology is coming, and it'll cost near nothing. So not only the problem with that is that doesn't give humans enough time to go, wait a minute, hold on, should I do this? when something is near instantaneous, you can almost still be in a really bad mood and really revved up about somebody who did you wrong. And even if you're a good person, even if you're just people like he's a good person, but you're mad, and you can create what would end up being like a revenge something or whatever, not even important, but just a revenge image or video of somebody who you feel just did you wrong. And you can post that in seconds with no real time or effort put into it. I find that like it's the speed that's going to get a lot of people in trouble. And I'm not sure because look in social media right now, how many times do you have to be on like a Facebook or whatever? And they're like, to the person who cut me off at the thing. And you're like, nobody was there. Nobody saw whatever you're talking about. Like nobody cares, but it's like, I just want to say, because they want to say their piece. They're mad. And their way right now of expressing that and venting is to, be a keyboard warrior with it or a thumb warrior, on their phone or whatever, like I'm going to tell my part and clearly it's one-sided. You'll never hear the other side of where I cut him off first, right? It's only clearly somebody did me wrong. But how quickly are we going to get to a snapshot of the person through their car window and you're going to be able to reproduce stuff that's detrimental to that other party because you were mad? And that worries me. It really does. And getting to this point of like, what's real, what's fake? Go ahead, Andy.
So the scale problem here was making this sort of an impossibility in my mind. So your point, Brian, is that nobody cares and nobody's going to bother to fact check on what you posted about that because it's so insignificant in the maelstrom of postings that we have to review. And I don't have enough time personally to go through the social media feeds that my daughter and my wife go through. And yet they come to me with things that influencers that they, have, some confidence in have made. And now we're going to change our process in our home because, they've been influenced. But it's, I guess I would lean a little bit on, I hope eventually they'll at least do a perplexity search about the topic and see if what they've just been sold is actually supported by what perplexity can gain in real time on the matter.
I am so glad you brought that up because not that I'm going to push back, but this is a great segue into somebody that I want to share. So actually, you know what? I'm going to share this tab first. So take a look at this, guys. And this is now, I have not spent a lot of time, so I'm not vouching for this. I just found it interesting in researching for this show. This is a Substack by Alexios, but his mention here is MANTZARLIS. If you want to look him up, Alexios. But he has Faked Up by Alexios, and he has 14 different Substacks, newsletters on this topic. But the reason I want to bring it up and the reason I wanted to come into this, let me find it again, is because he just did one talking about perplexity. And while he was saying perplexity, if I can summarize here, well, here we go. Perplexity AI is stumped by hoaxes from outside the US. Apple and Play allow for sweep. Okay, so that's the other topics. But here in the perplexity part of it, what he was saying in here is that perplexity in the US does a pretty good job. However, if you're using perplexity outside the US, it does somewhat fall apart. And here's a couple places where he talks about it. He talks about, did Rebecca Andrade, I don't know how to say last name, make an L sign for Lula at the Olympic Games? And he says, for instance, Brazilian fact checker so-and-so has debunked the theory that Simone Biles defeating gymnast Rebecca Andrade made an L sign, so on and so forth, yet Perplexity claims the opposite is true. And if you could read the thing, it says, yes, indeed did make the L sign. Now, I'm not saying any of us should believe that Perplexity is without wrong or error. Nobody should be going in and using a Perplexity. It's an AI tool. Everybody should be like worrying about it. But since you mentioned, Andy, I think this is a good point to bring up that, perhaps it's having a harder time with debunking hoaxes outside the US versus inside the US.
Yeah. And when it's on a small scale with few impacts, like, my household doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things in the world, there's never going to be an effective fact checking system unless I take responsibility for that, and I start, disputing everything that anybody around me presents with research. Go do your own research is the expression that comes out of all of that. But where it really matters is in validating reporting. And I want to use an example here of what a future validation system might look like. And this is completely imaginary. But what is required in order for something to reach a threshold of validation? It's a majority opinion kind of thing. Like on an inertial navigation system, you've got 3 different gyroscopes, and 2 out of the 3 have to agree in order for the autopilot to take the route that's recommended by those 2. And there's always going to be errors and confusion and so on. But by having 3 judges in the system, you get to the possibility of having at least 2, overcome the negative report of the 1. So now imagine this in the context of newsrooms. Right now, there are fact-checking organizations out there, PolitiFact, there's others. But people don't really pay attention to those streams. So what is it that would be added to the increasingly polluted information that's coming from deep fakes that would give you confidence when you're watching it on a feed or you're hearing it on the news? What would give you confidence? Well, in my case, what would give me confidence is that in real time, there are systems out there where, like, other newsrooms are looking at the same information and basically making a judgment call about whether that's got an 80% reliability or a 50% reliability. And all of that data is accumulated. And then, a legit newsroom would have a little thing there. And for everything that's said and for everything that's shown, there's a confidence score that's showing there. And if they're continuously in the 80%, 90% confidence score, then you can consider that particular outlet to be fairly reliable. If they're using the same common system, and some newsrooms might not want to use such a system because they're giving you their take on, alternative facts, then you wouldn't have any such confidence. But that ultimately may not matter anyway, because the people who are watching that particular news feed like the content quality, not veracity, but the qualities that they enjoy in that feed. And so they're going to be believers of that particular stream of information, despite the fact that there are tools out there that could, in some collective judgment fashion, determine whether or not something is likely to be true or not.
So I think that's interesting, because I think in some ways the way that you phrase that is indicative of the problem that we're facing, because I'm not sure that there are very many newsrooms that are not shifted toward an engagement economy just for survival or for whatever other reasons, right? But what we definitely, like, big mainstream kind of stuff, you sort of think of it as, again, this is going to be a Bethism, but you think of it as like a Broadway show, right? You got 40 people in the chorus. You got a like whole big thing. Like, you're going to need some absolute guarantees that you're going to get enough eyeballs to justify what you're paying for in your newsroom community. And that right now is less about veracity and more about how we triggered someone that they need to know what you need to know, right? Like, what you need to know before you buy lettuce this week in the grocery store, right? Like, like, that's the sort of thing that is being chosen because of the way that it can predict people's behavior in some ways. I think where we're moving, and we're, I think, as Americans, we're a little bit late to this party, is really focusing on how to vet the message personally. And that doesn't mean like it's true or it's not true, but can I identify why, if that message is fake, who that's benefiting, and if it's real, who that's hurting, right? Like, so I'm taking in my own context of the message and looking at it, and I gotta say, I'm sorry, the like sniff test or like that doesn't make sense to me. That is like a personal comfort. I really don't want that to be true, so it feels fake to me, right? Like it's helpful if you if you can like own your own, like, I cannot trust my own sense right now, because that's gonna suck if that's true.
I mean, but that's assuming that you even have the skill set and the willingness to do that. Let's just go back, because I agree with you saying, Beth and Andy as well. But let's also remind ourselves that, okay, our generations, the folks that are on this call, probably grew up with more of a centralized news source, be that whatever that was for you. I'm not picking any. And the younger generations, that's certainly not the case. We saw this at the DNC, where for the first time ever, they had an area in the back of the room. Now, the RNC might have had it too. I would have missed that. So I'm not saying they didn't. But the DNC had an area in the back that was specifically for content creators, influencers, whatever title you want to give them. I'll say content creators. Influencers can sometimes sound negative. However, there was people back there who had their channels, and they were earnestly covering in their way to their people, their fans, right? Whoever's following them, because they like their viewpoint or whatever it is. And we've seen this many, many times. So it's very decentralized. So in a perfect world, there would be some sort of blockchain. That's what I thought of when you were talking about, Andy, some sort of blockchain verified tool that says, okay, this goes out and it hits all these things, but it kind of goes through blockchain, and they go, you know what? It's come back, and it's 75% mostly fake, for a lot of reasons that comes back for that reason, because it's been validated through these different ways. Maybe there's a blockchain solution for that. But I worry personally about like the fact that the news now is being consumed. I'm not worried. It's just the way news is being consumed. And it's much more likely to be consumed if my daughter, again, they're 13, right in that age, if she is going to bring up a topic to me, more than likely, she's going to say, oh, I saw something about that on TikTok or Instagram. Not some news source, not seeing, not like she doesn't even know those things exist. Really, it's not in her world or whatever. And I think that's obviously where we're going. So we still have older generations where we're still consuming, and maybe, like I said, I appreciate an AP News or Reuters. I've talked about that before, because I feel like they're fair and balanced. For me, that's where I might go to get the news. My daughter doesn't even know they exist. And there's many, many other, younger generations, or even like in their 20s and 30s, who probably don't either, because they're getting their news in a different way. So that brings me up to this type of stuff, right? So if it's not a blockchain, like what do we have today? And so this is a Washington Post article from, I don't know, it might be a little while ago. I guess let me look really quick. Of course, it doesn't have the date on it. Doesn't matter. What they're talking about is, how can we put watermarks as one possible solution? I don't think this is really going to be the solution, but it's a starting point where there might be a color code in the bottom right, but also this is zoomed in, and more times than not, you can't actually see it. I've seen this before, this exact like sort of watermark, but really what they're saying is like, not perceived to the human eye. It's embedded in the image in pixels. So maybe there's a certain pattern of single color image pixels, and it creates sort of a visual something within the image, and that denotes it as being AI generated. But they point out in this article that, guess what? It's super easy to hack. Sometimes you can just adjust the color and put a filter on it. Sometimes you can just flip the image, mirror flip the image, and it breaks the watermark. So we already know that this is a solution. The other problem, and I'm just going to try to find it really quick. Oh, I thought I saved it. Here it is. Another issue we have is, okay, so what? Let's say that in one particular case that it is clearly labeled in watermark. Here's a good example of that, what I'm showing on the screen. So whatever it was, it was a Kamala Harris thing, but the person who originally did it in the title said parody. So the original creator said this is a parody, and they did some voice dubbing and stuff like that. The problem is, in this particular case, Elon Musk shared it and made no mention of it being a parody. So The creator did the right thing and said, this is a parody. This is, I'm poking fun. This is a meme. This is a video, whatever. It's for my followers or whatever. The problem was it was reshared and all of that was lost within that context. So unless we had something deeply embedded and foolproof within that, so that when Elon Musk, and I'm not picking on him, anybody reshared that, there was a sense of, hey, you have to pass this crucial information along. This is a parody. That to me would be, I grew up in the days of Weird Al Yankovic. That would be like passing along, getting a CD or a cassette tape of Weird Al Yankovic back in the day and saying, like a surgeon, this is an amazing song, whatever, and then just sharing that openly and making no mention to the fact that Weird Al is a comedian and a parody. He does parodies for music, and just sharing that and saying like, oh, this is real. What? There's nothing on me. There's no right or anything on me. The problem I see with this is like Elon Musk and other people on social media are probably going to have to decide or come together on some centralized way of doing this, having a Meta way of doing it and having an X way of doing it and have a Google way of doing it. I don't think that solves anything. There's going to either have to be legislation or so commonly agreed stop at the stop sign type law that people collectively say, this is how we determine this stuff online. I don't have the answer, by the way. I'm just saying this is all really interesting.
There is an organization of those big names that are trying to add that sort of prominence to imagery and audio and things like that, and that's the C2PA. And that's all the big people. That's Adobe, Microsoft, all of those folks in there. Now, is it going to be a one-stop solution? Probably not. Ryan, you brought up the whole blockchain thing that offers some more prominence, tracking and things like that. I think any image or whatnot might have to have some of that kind of stuff built in. It's essentially a form of DRM so that when that image gets uploaded, it has to be scanned for those traits. If it doesn't have those traits, then it will have to be added in when you add the image to whatever or send your image off to whatever platform. And so there is these steps, but you're right. There's no silver bullet. There's no perfect solution other than educating. And that even this is not a perfect solution, but one more layer that is educating everybody, being AI literate, being media literate. Instill those critical thinking skills, right? Get those multi-steps in your head so that you naturally do that on any piece of information that comes across. It'll be exhausting, absolutely, but this is the point that we're running into these problems.
Right. And this is why the personalized image is going to be so effective, because we are going to make those split-second assessments, because there's so much and we don't want it's too hard. The other thing that we haven't mentioned in this is that anything that is watermarked is also accessible for a fake watermark, right? Now, oh, look, it has those things. I can go and put that on an AP photo, right? That's not
Exactly right.
particularly hard. And this is just one of those active measure things. I think not that I'm blaming everything on Russia's active measures, but it is an old active measure technique, I believe, to make sure you win regardless, right? We just want to make people doubt reality. That's excellent. It doesn't matter what you do with your doubting reality. We've succeeded because we made people doubt reality. But the other piece that I want to say in this is it is particularly because I think I think of it as political ads, but it's also product ad kind of things. It's pretty standard that you would have an image, a voiceover, and maybe a snippet of some sort of physical action that's happening that isn't necessarily connected to the voice, right? And that is you can do that for $15 a month right now, right? You can create an image, you can animate it so that it looks like somebody's walking in an area where if the original image was correct, and you can fake someone's voice, right? So yeah. It's why media literacy and digital literacy, AI literacy is so important, I think.
I would like every source of news or information put sources, links to other sources, so people can go down that that chain. Like if you use Wikipedia and you read what's on the Wikipedia page, then you go to all their sources and verify that that's what's on the Wikipedia page. Then you write your paper about it. You know, just that normal college experience there. But again, each one of these is not a perfect solution, but just adding more and more of these methods and get your, get that thinking process going, that's going to alleviate some of it.
Yeah, and I think a last call to action here is, all of us. I'm certainly putting myself in this group. We can all do a better job of just making sure that if we are sharing stuff online or whatever, that we're doing the due diligence just personally to make sure that if it is fake and it's labeled as such, or we just know as such, that when we pass on that information, that we also make sure that we're letting whoever our audience know that in fact that's the case. That alone will probably go a long way if people just take personal attention towards that. But it's also a lot to ask. It's a large lift, but it's something we can all do. So if you're listening to this show, that's something you can take away from it. We'll leave it there for today. Tomorrow, guys, we're going to be talking about fine-tuning GPT 4.0, both 4.0 and 4.0 mini. When does that make sense? What are all the things you probably should be doing before you get to that level? We'll talk about all that stuff because I know a lot of people have questions. OpenAI has made it so it's like free to do to a certain point. People are starting to ask, well, should I be fine tuning? We're going to get into that tomorrow. Wednesday, as always, we'll be talking about the news over the last 7 days, what we think is interesting. Thursday, we're going to be talking about RAG prompting. So this came from Beth. Beth was saying she was in another group and people were asking a lot of questions about prompting with RAG systems. So perfect opportunity for us to kind of talk to you guys about best practices and everything else. And finally, on Friday, we're going to be doing a tool review of sorts, kind of staying in the OpenAI world where we're going to be talking about GPT actions. Early on, they weren't the best. At least that was my experience. And let's see if they've gotten better and what they can actually do. Like, what does the cookbook say they can do? And is that actually helpful to businesses right now? Should people be giving more attention to those GPT actions? That's it. That's everything we got coming up this week. Make sure you come back and hang out with us. As always, thank you to everybody in the comments, as always, and all the fun comments. Yes, I am wearing my salmon shirt, the return of the salmon shirt, as Jen said. So I'll make sure that keeps coming back. And until tomorrow, guys, have a great day. Okay.
Aloha.